hello. We're talking today to Nino Haratishvili from Germany. So becoming a writer, was that a decision, or did it come to you like something, undeniable, or, you stepped into deep waters yourself? Please tell us.
I've been always a reader since I was a child. I started quite early. And I loved the world of books, so somehow it was quite familiar to me, and it was maybe also a possibility to escape, because I grew up in the 90s in Georgia. It was a quite challenging time and not easy, this post-Soviet situation and civil wars and economical crisis and so on. So books always been, kind of maybe also an escape, and I loved the opportunity to be able to dive into something completely else and to be absorbed by some characters and be able to travel throughout so many times in different countries. But I could not imagine, maybe I was dreaming about it all my life, but it took me quite a long time to speak it loud out, somehow to realize that I want to dare to do so. Writing, I guess, in my teens, just around 14, 15, and I had a school a theater group. So that was my first experience. I wrote a play and we staged it at that period. And I became quite mad about this possibility to be able to write down something and people can play and speak all the words that I've written and fantasized. But I could not really imagine to study something like creative writing or even journalism. For me, it was quite quite intimate process. And I was writing like almost every day, and it was never kind of diary. It was always something, imagined. Maybe the first time that I really thought, okay, I want to try it. I want to give all that I write to somebody and find out if I'm good enough to be published, or even that people would like to read it. That took me a while. Yes, it was already in Germany when I studied here, and I guess it was like was 23 or 24. But it was a process. I was just like learning by doing. I was writing, but almost all my novels or plays I kept for myself and did not really show it to a lot of people, maybe few ones. And I was also lucky enough, maybe that people who encouraged me, teachers or friends, and that was really important because I was quite insecure about what I was doing. So it was a quite long process.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's different from 14, 15 years old. And later, when you started writing like books which you realized that are going to be published, did you think about who gonna read it and how they gonna react to that, especially your family members? And even now, when you write something and you know that your kids will be reading it one day, does it affect you? Does it make you, to take some decisions during writing, or you don't really care about that? And especially your family, we Armenians and Georgians, we are so careful about our traditions. We keep them sacred, and it's not everything that you can say and write. Does it affect you, or did you, pass through it already?
I guess I've passed it, but of course it did affect me somehow or in some terms. But I'm quite good in ignoring things while writing, because I have to do so. I have to completely shut down or just kind of keep the world away from me. Because otherwise it would be, I would not be free to fantasize, to think about things that it's important to me. And this is something that I guess I've learned. It was also a process. And in the beginning, of course, I was kind of afraid and terrified by what I'm writing and how people could react in it. But somehow, I mean, I love this process so much, and this is what I really, really admire about writing, to be able to escape from everywhere, even myself. Because it's not possible like every day, of course, but in the best moments, there is something like magic. I feel it's this way because I'm kind of forgetting everything. And if you would ask me, what's your name? I have to think about it for a while, because it's kind of into that issue or theme or characters. So somehow this world, it keeps just like it disappears. And even nowadays, I have to ignore it because, of course, if I would start thinking about how people could react, how my mother or my children or my friends, I wouldn't be free to do things I would like to do. So meanwhile, I can completely ignore it, yes. But it took a while to be able to do so.
You started writing in both languages, as far as I know, both in German and in Georgian, but you ended up to be a German writer. That's how they write about you, German writer Nino Haratishvili. But I do believe that in Georgia, everybody calls you a Georgian writer, or at least a Georgian German writer. How do you feel about that, and how does it affect your identity? How do you feel yourself? A German writer, a Georgian German writer, or just a writer?
I mean, I do not think of myself in this kind of category. I think I'm just a writer, and I don't think I'm Georgian or German. But of course, I mean, as a human being, as a person, I'm quite Georgian. And the longer I live in Germany, the more Georgian I become. It's a paradox, but it is this way. But in the beginning, I remember that when some critics appeared and people start writing about me and my works, I was a Georgian writer. Because my professional way, I mean, my publishing and everything started in Germany. So, and my literature language is German. So somehow, of course, issues and things and emotions and my way of approaching things is quite Georgian. In between, I'm kind of torn apart. This is my destiny, I guess. But for a lot of people with this migrational background, it's the same, I guess. But in my case, it was quite, because when I started here, I was a Georgian writer or Georgian playwright. Then I became a Georgian German writer. And after The Eighth Life, it is a huge book with more than 1,000 pages. After that book, I became a German writer. So it was a strange process. But this is something that I have no influence on it. So this is how people kind of accept me or kind of react on me or my works. And in Georgia, it's quite confusing because in the last 2-3 years, I also had a lot of readings there or meetings and conferences and different festivals, and people are coming and always asking this question, why do you write in German? And sometimes they're also confused because they expect me to be someone who does not speak fluent Georgian, and when they realize that I do, they're more confused. And some people are even kind of a little bit disappointed maybe, or mad, even angry, because this is emotionally I don't know why, but this is kind of sometimes I have a feeling that I beat our language or country. Yes, this is in Germany. It's also the same. They're always keeping this question: why do you write in German? And I can understand because it's a huge step. Of course, I do write in German, but still, it's not my mother language. And I can imagine and I can understand that it's confusing for a lot of people. In writers from, from former Soviet countries, a lot of them, or even Arabic states. And in the last 10 or 15 years, there have been a lot of novels and plays being published by writers with this migrational background, how they call them in Germany. And I think that people get more and more used to that. But still, it's something that people stand. So this is, I think, if you try to express it in a positive way, this is something that's fascinating.
I think in the modern world, these borders have erased because people and writers, they live wherever they want and they write in whatever language they can and they want to write in. So this kind of national literatures are changing into, a global literature. So that's quite normal. And talking about your literature, your novel, The Eighth Life, which went huge in Germany as far as I know, and you mentioned that it's a very big book. And I read in one of your interviews that it's a family saga. Well, I have read part of the book. It's a family saga, and you mentioned yet that you didn't plan it to be one and intended to tell a story from back in 90s. But apparently, without a wider perspective, the 90s story won't be understood, right? I personally understand the situation because Armenia, along with Georgia, and the rest of the countries from USSR have seen this period, and it was far away from Europe's eyes. So now, how important do you think generally to give the context to what you write? Because the book is about Georgia, is about the family, and how important is context usually in literature and in your literature?
I guess it is very important because you always, you cannot start empty page. It's never quite empty because we're always a part of a society, of time, of political situation, of our countries, and so on and so on. So in that particular case, it was just like, I didn't plan to sit down and write a family saga and so on. I had a lot of questions. It was a quite selfish approach. In Germany, I've realized that I knew the history of the 20th century much more from the Western perspectives than from the Eastern. For example, I didn't know a lot of things about fascism and Hitler and so on, because in Germany it's impossible not to be confronted with this history. And in Georgia, we never did analyze this historical analysis because the last 13 years people were trying to survive and to find a new ways of living and get new opportunities. And so many things changed and so many things happened, and it's still just like a process that it's not finished. And yes, I started digging, I started reading, and yes, I thought I would focus on this 18th and 90s, time when I grew up, and a lot of things changed and happened. And it was a quite brutal time in Georgia, and I guess the same in Armenia, former Soviet countries. But I realized, yes, that it's impossible to start from that point because it was like an ending of an era, ending of a period of a century. And politically, it would be impossible to explain why this way or that way without knowing the whole context and without knowing things that happened before. And so I start my time traveling, as I call this process. And I knew, yes, it's going to be it's a book about family history, family saga, my time travel. And I always compare this process with a house that I entered. And every time when I thought, okay, I opened up in every room in this house, I discovered like much more rooms and much more places. So I kept on and on and on and did a lot of research and traveled a lot through Russia and also Georgia. And it was a fascinating, also really, really emotional process but I did not, of course, I had no guarantee, or I could not even imagine if people would be interested in that history, because people know their history from their point of view. There is a lack of different perspectives on that time. And even I remember when we started to make corrections on that book, and when I talked with my publisher, didn't know, or this is completely different in your way of the storytelling. So this is what I'm really happy about, or even thankful, because this changed a little bit in Germany since I do live here. And people become maybe more aware of that Europe is not like only Germany and France and Italy. And there is kind of a little bit more interest to open up the horizon and have a look like a different. It was because when The Eighth Life been published, it was 2014, and the Russian-Ukrainian war started. And maybe that was also kind of a signal, and people become more aware of, okay, it's not so far away. It's like in the middle of Europe. And it can still happen, and maybe it can even happen with us.
When we talked about your book, when we first talked to you, you said, my question was, is your writing political? And your answer was very interesting. You said everything is political in life. So do you intend to be political, or does it come naturally because everything is political, our life is political? And maybe that's why your book was so interesting to German readers and other readers around the world, because they learn more of it rather than only their own perspective.
I guess for me it's a naturally thing, yes, as you mentioned, because I never had a goal to, no, I want to be like a political activist or political writer. But for me, it's impossible to tell a story or think about something without this political context. And for me, politics, it's just not like, it's not only, what's happening in the world and the news and wars and politicians. I mean, the whole context, the society, things we're doing, the way we're doing, even relationships, families, constructions of our, the system we're living, and all the capitalistic stuff and everything that we're confronted, and we're part of it. So we're not on an island, and we don't have this empty page. So in some way, it was for me kind of natural. Sometimes I get angry and mad because people or critics in Germany, it's always, okay, if you have this historical or political context, it's like much more valued. It's not as simple or so black and white, because you can even write a play or a novel about just like it can be a love story, and still it could be more political than you write a novel about, I don't know, the fall of the Iron Curtain or something, yes. And I think, yes, I guess something that I cannot ignore, and I cannot write things without this context. A lot of history and a lot of archive work and documents and so on. Of course, this is something that people can read as a really political book. But for me, it's my aim or my goal while writing was not writing about the history in a way that I can explain you how it was, because I'm not a historian, and of course it's always an interpretation. But for me it was when I write to show all the structures and this political stuff by their biographies, by really completely private persons living their lives or looking and searching for the personal happiness and pursuits and the struggles, and not by telling just like some facts and showing some documents and writing about. It's much more interesting, and maybe it's also something that you can understand, or you can feel it much better when because you identify yourself with this character. Read some facts, just like so many people have died or been killed. It's always something. It's abstract still. I mean, you know it, but as a human being, it's kind of impossible. Cruelty is a brutality of some even so some process events, just like, you know, all the Gulag stuff I've been researching and reading things about, and you read it and it's kind of unbelievable, unimaginable. Try to make this, I mean, when you show it by a biography of character and you this is what I was trying in that book, to show the struggle of each of them with the system and the brutality of the system. Maybe this is something that helps to approach it better. For me, it's this way, yeah.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with you. Literature is always more impressive than like news or political statements. I wanted to ask you about theater as well, because you started your writing as a playwright at 14, 15, right? You mentioned, but you never gave it away. You never ended writing. So you are also a playwright, quite famous one and appreciated in Germany, as far as I know. And I want to ask you, what's your relationship with these two, literature and playwriting, you know, books and theater? Are they like twin kids to you, twin children, or are they like husband-lover relationship?
Yes, maybe my novels are kind of my husband and my plays are my lovers. I don't know. That is a good... a good symbol, maybe. I love theater, and yes, I've started in theater, and my background is kind of, yes, related and connected. And still, when I'm sitting for months at home and write, achieve a point when I realized, oh, I need this teamwork, and I'm missing theater and all the discussion and all the, yes, I mean, theater is something you cannot do on your own. When you're, as a playwright, you always think about actors and people who are going to become that characters and so on. So while writing prose, I never think about it. It's just like something, it's completely only in my mind. It's my fantasy and I'm completely theater. Yes, I love about theater this teamwork, and it's really complex and complicated because you cannot do anything. I cannot imagine that I could just like quit with theater and never return back, because this is a kind of home for me where I always keep coming back and returning. But of course, they're different mediums, and the approach is completely different. But for me, it starts with an idea, and it's an issue, it's a question, it's something that I don't really forget about it. And this is an idea that I have to, of course, I have to think about, and sometimes even I have an idea it's going to become or be, or is it something worth writing? So it's always a process and it takes a lot of time. At some point, this idea and the issue is form. So I always know in the beginning, this would be a great thing for stage. And this is something that I cannot, it's impossible to be staged, or it's impossible to find a form that would be theater. Mm-hmm. So it's always dictated by my ideas. And but of course the process is not completely different. It's so much time as a novel, because sometimes it's even more complicated to find an appropriate form and right language and so on. So generally novels take more time. Mm-hmm. But there are also some plays that I've been writing for like 3 years. But I really do love theater and I miss it. I mean, right now I do miss it even more.
The process is similar, but the results are different, because when you finish your book, you're done. And when you're finished your play, the result is coming later, and it doesn't much depend on you, right? Because it depends on the actors and everything. Yeah. My last question would be mostly for the young writers, and we want to hear them this question and your answer. Do you have to sacrifice much to be a writer? Did you sacrifice much?
Oh, it's a good question. It's a good question, and I think I'm thinking about it. I even wrote a play about it years ago. I think yes, but I question myself, is there something in our lives? I mean, is there a great passion or something that we really, really love, that you don't have to sacrifice something else for that? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it's especially literature or this being a writer that you have to. I think it's always the same in life when you are completely into something. It always means that you have take your time from some different places, persons, and so on, and keep it that thing that you really admire and you're into it. And I think, yes, I had to sacrifice also in my personal life some things. And this is something that I really think it's especially even the price is even higher when you're a female writer. Still, it is so. And of course, it's also not easy if you have kids and you have to balance it out and find the right balance.
Kids. How do you handle
of your personal life and your working life? But I always knew that this is something. It's not easy. You always need help. You always supporters, and I'm lucky enough. For example, in my case, my mother is here and helping me a lot. But it's not impossible. You can handle everything, and I think it's in any other profession that when you as a mother, you have to find a way to handle it, to find the right balance. But I never doubted it. For me, it was just like something so natural that for me, writing was like breathing or eating. If I have to quit it for somebody or anybody, I mean, I could not really imagine, because I knew that I would stop being myself. And even now, when sometimes I have, of course, I have some of feeling guilty when I go. I know that my kids are just like I cannot be with them for 2 or 3 days, but I always keep telling myself that they will be much more happy. And they're both girls, and for me it's important for them to learn it and see it. If they have a happy mother, a mother who knows who she is, and this one who is just like, okay, I sacrificed everything for you, and I don't want to be forced to say this sentence to them, I hope never, because I would hate it. Just like in, I don't know, 20 or 30 years when I will look at my life or my past, to be kind of, I want to have my peace, and I don't want to regret anything. It's always a balance. It's challenging. Of course, it's not easy, but I do believe that when somebody loves you, it's like, you love me, love my dog. So in my case, my dog is my writing. So I kind of hope that I don't have to explain myself and every time. But sometimes the society forces you thinking that way. It starts even in Germany, yes. I mean, of course, the society is more liberal and there are more helping structures than in Georgia, for example. But still, it starts even here when you got pregnant and everyone is just asking, and do you want to, how long will you stay at home? I was saying that I will start work after 8 months. Everyone was just like, oh, really? Are you sure? Is it okay for your kids? And I still realize that there is so much work to do in that terms. And we're kind of really far away from equal rights, and this issues are even here in the middle of Europe. Sometimes I do feel that we're still in 50s. And I think it's much more, even more important to have these role models and try to show our daughters or young girls or teens who are starting their lives right now and have their visions and dreams, that it's possible and we have to fight for it.
Nino, I am sure your kids will be proud of you when they grow up, that's definitely. Thank you very much for the interesting interview. Thank you.